أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Verily, our praise is due to Allah. Praise Him. We seek His aid and we ask for His forgiveness. We seek refuge in Allah from the evils of our own selves and from the evils of our own actions. And whomsoever Allah guides, none can misguide. And whomsoever Allah leaves astray, none can guide back to the correct path. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. We testify there is no deity worthy of our worship except for Allah, who is alone with a partnership and never has and never will be another. And we bear witness that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the last and the final prophet of Allah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters, friends and family, everybody tuning into the live stream, everybody joining us for the Zoom meeting. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us again for reading of When the Moon Split for our Sunday discussion, a biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu compiled by Safiur, Rahman, Mubarakpuri. Last week we had left off regarding the delegation of Banu Amir bin Sa'sa'i, at the bottom of page 291, or midway through 291. So with that, we'll go ahead and continue. Bismillah. So the delegation of Banu Amir bin Sa'sa'a included Arbad bin Qais, Jabbar bin Aslam, and Amir bin Ufayl. And Amir, it must be remembered, was the leader of the massacre of some of the Prophet's companions at Bir Mu'anna. And he and Arbad came with the intention to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ if the opportunity arose. And when the group came to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ invited them to accept Islam. Amir, as leader of the delegation, said, I give you the power to choose one of three options. First, you can choose to rule the people of the valley while I rule the desert dwellers. Second, you name me as your successor. Third, you can refuse the first two, in which case I will march on you with 1,000 horses and 1,000 mares of Ghatfan. And the Prophet ﷺ declined each of the choices given him, saying Allah SWT alone was sufficient to guide Amr and his people. So proceeding according to their plans to kill the Prophet ﷺ, Arbad moved behind the Prophet ﷺ while Amr engaged him in talking. Arbad tried to draw his dagger only to find his hand suddenly paralyzed, unable to grip the weapon, and the two plotters returned unsuccessfully. And on the way back to Medina, Amr broke journey at the home of a woman belonging to his clan, the Banu Salul. And there, as he lay sleeping, Allah caused him to become very ill. I have a tumor in my throat, just like camels have. He said, am I to die like from a camel lump, and that too in the house of a woman? Bring me my horse. And his steed was brought to him, and he died even as he sat on horseback. And Amr's co-conspirator, Arbad, was struck by lightning, and both he and his camel were reduced to ashes. And Allah SWT revealed two verses referring to Arbad's punishment, Surah 13, Ayat 13. And he hurls thunderbolts and strikes whomever he wishes. Still they dispute about Allah, though he is severe in punishment. And the deaths of both Amr and Arbad are reported to the Prophet ﷺ by their fellow tribesmen, Mu'ila bin Jabal of Banu Amr, and he accompanied the two to Medina. But unlike them, he had accepted Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ and presented him with his camel. And at the time, Mu'ila was 20 years old, and he lived to be 100 years, and his eloquence earning him the title, the one with two tongues. So next is the delegation of Banu Hanifa. The Banu Hanifa also visited the Prophet ﷺ in the 9th year after the Hijrah. 17 of their people, including the infamous Musaylama, the liar, came to Medina and embraced Islam in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. And some sources indicate that Musaylima accepted Islam along with the other members of the delegation. And other sources, however, assert that he stayed behind at a camp and did not become Muslim. And he is also reported to have said that he would embrace Islam only if the Prophet ﷺ made him his successor. And before the arrival of this delegation, The Prophet ﷺ had a vision that a treasure had been brought to him, and from this treasure, 2 gold bangles were placed on his wrist, and they proved to be very painful for him. And he was told to blow on the 2 bangles, and when he did so, the bangles fell off, and the Prophet ﷺ interpreted the dream for his companions, and the bangles represented 2 false prophets that would appear after him. And the Prophet ﷺ was walking with his companion, Thabit bin Qais, and when he met the first false prophet, Musaylama the liar, Musaylama was with his comrades, and he said to the Prophet ﷺ insolently, "If you like, I will let you remain the head of state. However, I will be your successor." And the Prophet ﷺ showed him the small date branch he had in his hand and said, "I shall not give you even this date. You cannot escape Allah's decree, and if you turn back, Allah will destroy you. By Allah, you are the one whom I saw in a vision. This is Thaibat bin Qais, and he will reply to you on my behalf." And upon the return of the delegation, Musaylama kept a low profile, and after some time, however, he began claiming that the Prophet ﷺ had agreed to share his mission with him, claiming to be a prophet who also received revelations. He made wine and adultery lawful for his people, and his people went through a great trial of faith, and several of them succumbed to his false doctrines, although the Prophet ﷺ was still alive. And in the midst of Musaylama's so-called mission, the Prophet ﷺ died, and it was left to his successor Abu Bakr to punish Musaylama. And Abu Bakr sent a detachment under Khalid bin Walid to kill Musaylama and his men. And after a fierce battle, the impostor was killed by Washi bin Harb, who in his pagan days had earned infamy by killing Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib. And by Allah's grace, the same Washi earned the honor of eliminating Musaylima, the false prophet. So next, the kings of Hamir send an envoy. So after the Prophet ﷺ returned from Tabuk, Malik bin Murrah called upon him carrying letters from the kings of Hamir, Harith bin Abd Kalal, Naim bin Abd Kalal, and Nu'aman. And he also bore letters from the heads of Hamdan. And the rulers wrote to the Prophet ﷺ to inform him that they had all embraced Islam. And in reply, the Prophet ﷺ sent a letter to them explaining their rights and duties and defined their responsibilities under the covenants they had entered. And then the Prophet ﷺ sent Muwadda bin Jabal and others back with the delegation to act as judges and military commanders in Upper Yemen. They were also responsible for overseeing collection of charity and zakat, as well as leading prayers. Abu Musa Ashari was sent to the Yemeni coast, while Mu'abba Zama was sent inland. And the Prophet ﷺ instructed both of them to make things easy for the people and not to create unnecessary hardship. He also advised them to spread the good news of Islam and to help everyone live in harmony. And Muwadda remained in Yemen till the death of the Prophet ﷺ, while Abu Musa returned to visit the Prophet ﷺ during the farewell Hajj. Next is the delegation of Hamdan. So among that delegation from Hamdan that visited the Prophet ﷺ was the great poet Malik bin Namt, who extolled the Prophet ﷺ in verses such as the following. I swear by the Lord of the ladies circling Mina and those returning with the caravans from the heights of Khordad that we have accepted the truthfulness of the Prophet. He is a messenger guided by the throne, by the Lord of the throne above. No camel ever had in her saddle a man as strong as Muhammad against his enemy. And initially, Malik bin Namt was sent back to his homeland to help those of his clan who embraced Islam. But later, the Prophet ﷺ sent Khalid bin Walid to invite all people of Hamdan to embrace Islam. And 6 months went by as Khalid tried in vain to spread Islam, and then the Prophet ﷺ sent Ali bin Abi Talib and recalled Khalid, and Ali read out the letter from the Prophet ﷺ inviting the people of Hamdan to accept Islam, and they all complied. And on receiving the good news, the Prophet ﷺ prostrated in praise of Allah, and then raising his head, he said, "Peace be upon Hamdan, peace be upon Hamdan." Next is the delegation of Banu Abdul Madan. So in Rabi al-Awwal, the 10th year after the Hijrah, The Prophet ﷺ sent Khalid bin Walid to Banu Abdul Madan, and they lived in Najran in Yemen, and Khalid was instructed to invite them to accept Islam for 3 days. And if they refused, he was allowed to use force to make them subjects of the Islamic State. And when Khalid arrived, he sent his men in all directions to invite the people of the region to accept Islam, saying, O people, as the Muslims cried, accept Islam and you will have peace. And the people readily accepted Islam, and Khalid and his men set about teaching the people of Banu Abdul Madan the basics of the faith. And Khalid then sent a message to the Prophet ﷺ, informing him of his success, and the Prophet ﷺ responded by asking Khalid to escort a delegation from the region of Medina. And the delegation arrived in Medina and met the Prophet ﷺ, who asked them several questions. During the days of ignorance, how did you subdue those who fought against you? We remained united, the delegation replied, and we never oppressed anyone. And the Prophet ﷺ stated that you speak the truth. And then the Prophet ﷺ appointed Qais bin Hisn as the governor of Banu Abdul Madan, and the delegation left Medina in the last of Shawwal, or in the beginning of Dhul Qadda, and ever concerned that the Muslims living far from Medina would revert to the ignorance of paganism, the Prophet ﷺ also sent Amr bin Hazm to teach them more about Islam. Next is Banu Hazja, Mazhaj. So in Ramadan, the 10th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ sent Ali bin Abi Talib to Banu Mazhaj in Yemen to call them to Islam, and Ali was not to fight them unless they attacked first. And Ali's call to the people of Banu Mazhaj towards Islam was received with hostility. They shot arrows at Ali and his men, but the Muslims were undeterred and counterattacked it. And after Ali had shown the Banu Mazhaj that they were no match for the Muslim warriors, he called off the attack and once again extended an invitation to embrace Islam. And this time, the Banu Mazhaj accepted the offer and became Muslim. And after the chieftains and notables of the tribes came forward and took the oath of allegiance, they gave Ali a charity offering for the poor and weak, stating, take from this the rights of Allah. Ali and his men returned north and met the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca during the farewell Hajj. Next is the delegation of Azd Shanwa. So as Shanwa, a famous tribe of southern Arabia, sent a delegation headed by Shard bin Abdullah Azdi, and they all embraced Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ appointed Shard as their chief and ordered the Muslims among them to fight the polytheists in southern Arabia. And Dhul Khalasa is destroyed. So the Prophet ﷺ continued to receive delegations and individuals. Jarir bin Abdullah Bajli was one of such individuals who called upon the Prophet ﷺ and later became one of his most renowned companions. His tribe, the Bajila and Hasham, had a large temple called Dhul Khalasa, which its pagan devotees put on part with the Kaaba, and they called Dhul Khalasa the Kaaba of Yemeniya and referred to the Kaaba as Kaaba Shamia. And one day the Prophet ﷺ said to Jarir, will you not give me peace from Dhul Khalasa? And understanding that the Prophet ﷺ wanted him to destroy the pagan temple, Jarir told the Prophet ﷺ that he was not a good horseman. And at this, the Prophet ﷺ struck Jarir's chest and said, O Allah, keep Jarir firm on his horse, guide him, and let him guide others. And accompanied by 150 horsemen from his clan, the Ahmaz, Jarir attacked the temple and burned it down. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard the news, he invoked Allah's blessing 5 times for the people and the horses of Ahmaz. And next is the rise and fall of Aswad Ansi. So Islam continued to spread throughout Yemen and southern Arabia, and soon the Prophet ﷺ's administrators controlled the entire region. Suddenly, the second false prophet, whom the Prophet ﷺ had seen in a vision, arose from the city of Khaf Hanan, and his name was Aswad Ansi, and backed by 700 warriors, he claimed to be a prophet and ruler. And Aswad captured the city of Sana'a, and he quickly gained power and territory. And the situation became so difficult for the Muslim administrators that they found themselves confined to territory of Ashura'ain. And for 3 or 4 months, these distressing circumstances persisted until Firoz Delmi, a Muslim from Persia, and his men moved against Aswad and his army. And Firoz killed the false prophet, cut off his head, and threw it outside of the citadel. And the sight of their leader's severed head shattered the resistance of Aswad's soldiers, and they fled. And when peace was restored, the Muslim administrators wrote to the Prophet ﷺ and resumed their duties. So Aswad Ansi was killed exactly 1 day before the Prophet ﷺ himself died. The Prophet ﷺ, however, had already been informed by revelation that Aswad would be killed, and he announced the news accordingly, and the letter bearing the good news was later received by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So Wajatul Wada, the farewell pilgrimage, is the next section here. So, which very famous section, and probably one of the most powerful statements given to the Muslim nation is as such. So by the 10th year after the Hijrah, Islam had spread over the entire Arabian Peninsula. A great number of people capable of carrying the message of Islam worldwide arose in the coming years. And it was at this point that Allah SWT chose to show his prophet the fruits of his mission by calling him to make a farewell pilgrimage to Mecca. So the Prophet ﷺ announced that he would perform Hajj, and a large number of people flocked to Medina to accompany him. And on Saturday, Dhul Qa'dah, the 26th, the Prophet ﷺ left Medina after praying the noon prayer, and a few hours later, he reached Dhul Hulayfa, where he prayed the afternoon prayer and spent the night. And the next morning, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Last night, a messenger from my Lord came to me and said, 'Perform prayer in this blessed valley and tell the people that Umrah can be performed during Hajj.'" And this was in reference to the common belief that Umrah could not be performed during the time of Hajj. And then the Prophet ﷺ bathed before the noon prayer and applied musk on his head and body. And after the prayer, he put on his ihram and then raised his voice and began the pilgrim chant. Labbaik Allahumma labbaik, labbaik la sharika lak labbaik. I answer your call, O Allah. I answer your call. I answer your call. You who have no partner, I answer your call. Verily, all praise, grace, and dominion belongs to you. You who have no partner. A week later, the Prophet ﷺ reached Mecca after praying the dawn prayer. He entered the sacred mosque, and it was Sunday morning, Dhul Hijjah, the 4th. And the Prophet ﷺ then circumambulated the Kaaba and performed 7 circus between Mount Safa and Marwa. When he finished, he remained in Ihram, which meant he was still in the consecrated state of pilgrimage. And he asked all the pilgrims who had brought sacrificial animals along with them to remain in Ihram as well. And others were also allowed to shave their heads. Then on Dhul Hijjah, the 8th, the Prophet ﷺ went to Mina, where those who had shaved their heads assumed Ihram again. And in Mina, the Prophet ﷺ performed the noon, the afternoon, the sunset, evening, and dawn prayers. He then left Mina after sunrise for Arafat, and the tent was set up for him in the valley of Nimrah. And as the sun was setting, he mounted his camel and rode into the valley of Arafat. And pilgrims began gathering around him and waited to hear what was to be one of the most important speeches. He began by glorifying Allah, testifying that Allah was one God and that he, Muhammad, was his prophet and messenger. And he states as such. Oh, people, listen, I know not whether I shall meet you here again after this year. Your blood, your property, and your honor are as sacred as this day, this month, and this city. Behold, I declare that all pagan customs and everything from the days of ignorance are beneath my feet. Abolished also is the practice of spilling blood for revenge. The first case of blood revenge that I abolish is that of the son of Rabi'a bin al-Harith, who was nursed by Banu Sa'ad and killed by Banu Hudayl. Moreover, the usury of the days of ignorance is abolished, and the first practice of usury I abolish is that of Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib. Now all usury is abolished. Fear Allah regarding women. You have taken them as a trust from Allah, and intercourse with them has been made permissible by the words of Allah. You have rights over them, one of which is that they must not allow someone you dislike into your home. If you do so, you are within your rights to chastise them, but not severely. It is their right over you that you should feed and clothe them in a fitting manner. I leave behind something. If you hold fast to it, you will never go astray, and that is the book of Allah. Now, if you are asked about me on the day of judgment, how will you respond? And the Prophet ﷺ's companions replied, we will testify that you have conveyed the message and fulfilled your mission. And the Prophet ﷺ raised his index finger towards the sky and then pointed towards the people, stating, "O Allah be witness, O Allah be witness, O Allah be witness." And after the Prophet ﷺ had finished addressing the people, he received a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Surah 5, Ayat 3. Today I have perfected your religion for you and completed my favor upon you and have chosen Islam as your religion. And after the Prophet ﷺ ended his address, Bilal made the prayer call, the adhan, and the final prayer call, the iqama, and the Prophet ﷺ led the people in a shortened noon prayer. Following that, Bilal called another Iqama, and the Prophet ﷺ led the people in a shortened afternoon prayer, and thus the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated how travelers should combine in shortened prayers. And after sunset, the Prophet ﷺ left for Muzdalifah and combined the sunset and evening prayers. He did not shorten the sunset prayer, but he did shorten the evening prayer. Furthermore, when the Prophet ﷺ combined the noon and afternoon prayers as well as the sunset and evening prayers, he did not perform any additional voluntary prayers, the sunnah prayers between them. Then he rested until dawn. And once he had performed the dawn prayer, he returned to Mecca to the sacred mosque. He faced the Qibla and repeated the takbir, Allahu Akbar, Allah is the most great, the tahleel, La ilaha illallah, there is no deity except Allah, and the tawheed, testimony of the oneness of Allah, until light began to appear in the horizon. And before sunrise, the Prophet ﷺ left for Mina again. He threw 7 stones at the largest Jamrah, saying Allahu Akbar with every throw. And when the Prophet ﷺ finished stoning the Jamrah, he ceased reciting the Talbiyah, the Baik Allahumma Labaik. And he also told his companions, learn the rites of Hajj from me, for perhaps I shall not be able to perform Hajj after this year. And the stoning became completed. The Prophet ﷺ went to his camp in Mina and slaughtered 63 camels. Ali slaughtered the remaining 37 camels, and the Prophet ﷺ instructed that a part of each camel be cooked and served to him and his companions. And after performing the sacrifice, the Prophet ﷺ had his head shaved, beginning with the right side of his head, and some of his hair was distributed among his companions. Abu Talha was given the Prophet ﷺ's hair from the left side of his head. And the Prophet ﷺ put on his ordinary clothes now that he was out of ihram. He applied musk and then rode his camel to the sacred mosque. There he circled the Kaaba 7 times, and after the noon prayer, he went to the people of Banu Abdul Muttalib, who were serving Zamzam water to the pilgrims. He said, Banu Abdul Muttalib, continue drawing water from the well. I would join you in this task, but I fear people would try to take over your rightful duty. They gave the Prophet ﷺ some Zamzam water, which he proceeded to drink then. And the Prophet ﷺ returned to Mina and stayed there for days of Tashriq, Dhul Hijjah, the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. Each day he stoned all the 3 Jamarats after the sunset, starting with the smallest one, Jamra al-Sughura, and then proceeding to the middle and the large ones afterwards. And the Prophet ﷺ delivered 2 more addresses on the 10th and the 11th of Dhul Hijjah, stressing the same points that he made in his sermons on the plain of Arafat. And it was during these days of Tashriq, before his last address, that he received Sultan al-Nasr. And on Tuesday, Dhul Hijjah, the 13th, the Prophet ﷺ left Mina after stoning all 3 Jamras, and he performed the noon, afternoon, sunset, and evening prayers at Abta. And he also sent Aisha along with her brother Abdul Rahman bin Abi Bakr to perform Umrah. And when Aisha returned, the Prophet ﷺ went to the Kaaba and performed the farewell circumambulation. And after performing the dawn prayer, he left Mecca to begin the journey back to Medina. And as he approached the city of Medina and its landmarks grew visible, the Prophet ﷺ called out Allahu Akbar thrice and said, nothing is worshipped except Allah. He is the one, he has no associate. Dominion and all praise are his. and he has power over all things. We are returning, repenting, worshiping, praising, and bowing before our Lord. Allah has proved that his promise is true and he has helped his slaves. Victory is his alone. So next is the expedition to Palestine. The Prophet ﷺ returned to Medina, aware that he was near the end of his mission, and he spent most of his time praising and glorifying Allah, who had given him success after success during his 23 years of prophethood. And people were entering Islam in multitudes, and delegations continued to arrive before him. And in Rabi al-Awwal, the 11th year after the Hijrah, the Prophet ﷺ sent Usama bin Zayd with 700 soldiers through the territory of Balka and Dharam in Palestine, and they were to stage a show of might against the Romans who had resumed their hostile acts. And the armies set out, and at Jorf, only 3 miles outside of Medina, they received news that the Prophet ﷺ was very ill, and they encamped there awaiting further news of the Prophet ﷺ's health. And with the Prophet ﷺ's subsequent death, Usama and his men went on their expedition and became the first people to lead a military expedition during the caliphate of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. With that, let's go ahead and stop here at signs of the Prophet ﷺ's imminent death here at page 303. We'll go ahead and continue next week. We hope to see you then. Allahumma subhanahu wa bihamdi ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik.